Another South African soldier has died in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This brings to 14 the number of SANDF members who have been killed in the DRC's conflict with M23 rebels since the beginning of this year. Concerns have been raised about the deployment of the soldiers to the DRC. Many have criticized the government, saying the soldiers are not adequately trained and fully equipped to take on a fight against the M23 rebels. The troops are in the country as part of a SADC mission. Joining us is Defence Analyst Dean Wingrin to unpack the situation. Dean, thanks for your time. Now, let's start with the latest developments in the DRC. Just your comments on these deaths. I think the last time you and I spoke, we didn't have the last 14 casualties.
That's correct, and good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Yes, yesterday evening, the Defence Force announced that a 14th soldier has passed away. This particular member, I think, was injured last week during the initial fighting on the Wednesday and Thursday and was hospitalized. And he passed away from his injuries in hospital. So as he said, this brings to 14 soldiers that have died in the last 2 weeks. And there's been a large number of injuries as well. The Defence Force hasn't mentioned the exact numbers, but we estimate between 15 and 20 soldiers at least must have suffered injuries as well. And I think it's quite imperative that our soldiers are now brought home as quickly as possible.
So, Dean, let's talk about the number of soldiers that were sent to the DRC. I think, if my memory serves me right, it's a little over well, I suppose you can confirm that number. That's the first thing. So it would be good to know how many soldiers went. And then there's the issue of casualties of war. We are in war. There is expectation that life may be lost. And I think the issue at the moment is that these soldiers are ill-equipped to deal with the force of the M23 rebels. So just walk us through those two issues, if you will.
Yes, well, South Africa has actually got two missions in the DRC. The one is under the auspices of the United Nations, which is what goes under the name of MONUSCO, and South Africa is part of the Force Intervention Brigade. And there's just under 1,000 soldiers allocated to that. And then we've also got the SADC mission, which goes under the name of SAMI DRC. And the President, Ramaphosa, has authorized a maximum of 2,900 soldiers to be allocated to that particular mission. But not all of those have been sent. And the exact numbers there under that mission, and these are the forces that took the brunt of the fighting, is we don't actually know exactly how many. But there's also roughly, I think, just over 1,000 of those as well. So, and of those, they split between a number of different locations. The main South African base is at Sake, which is about 25 kilometers northwest of the capital, Goma, of the provincial capital. So we've got troops in Sake, we've got troops in Goma, and then we've got small forces dotted around the area as well. And the problem now is that these actually need to be consolidated, brought to one spot, and negotiated for their extraction.
Dean, what I didn't hear from you is obviously when soldiers go to war, we'd like all of those soldiers to return. But what is an acceptable number in terms of casualty before we get to panic stations, if there is such a number?
Yes, well, that's right. Well, I think the acceptable number is 0, but you also got to be realistic as well. When you send your soldiers to war, you do expect that there will be fatalities. But when you do send your soldiers to war, you also expect that they be properly trained, properly equipped, and properly supported, and that you have sent enough of them that can accomplish the mission. Now, I mentioned about the UN mission there, and at its maximum, the UN mission had about 15,000 troops of various nations within the eastern DRC. The UN mission was meant to withdraw towards the end of last year, and SADC's mission had pretty much a maximum of about 5,000 troops. of which we know not every country has contributed its full allocation, being South Africa, Malawi, and Tanzania. And so if 15,000 troops had difficulty keeping M23 and the other rebel groups in check, I think it was unrealistic to expect a much smaller force from SADC to have much of an impact in a concerted push, as M23 and its Rwandan backers have done in these last 3 to 4 weeks.
So Dean, that immediately raises the question as to why are we sending our soldiers to be part of a number of 5,000, if you will, when 15,000 have failed? I mean, it raises a lot of questions, is it not? Was there insufficient intelligence? Is it just a case of, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's almost shocking, right, when you put it into perspective, that you have 15,000 troops that have struggled to deal with the M23 rebels, and then you have a force of under 5,000 that's expected to do the same amount of work.
Indeed, and I do believe a commission of inquiry should be called after a suitable time, that the troops and the situation in the DRC has settled down somewhat, particularly the spat between Rwanda and South Africa, and which definitely requires a political settlement now. Particularly urgent negotiations, I believe, are ongoing to extract our troops. But as you said, the South African defense budget has been declining dramatically over the last, you could say, 2 decades. And over the last 10 years, there's been innumerable warnings coming not only from defense analysts and independent commentators, but from within the Defense Force itself, saying that the Defense Force is severely undercapacitated, it's underfunded, and cannot support a mission such as we have in the DRC, 3,000 kilometers away from South Africa. And that is a serious problem, as to, it's a political decision to send our troops there. There are good reasons for it, as well as there are reasons why maybe you shouldn't, but it's a political decision in the end, that to serve the economic and political interests of South Africa and to see stability in the rest of Africa. But if you're going to send your troops to support that, then they must be supported. And if they cannot be supported, then they shouldn't have been sent.
Then just walk us through a comparison of the M23 rebels, that force, their capabilities, and the fact that they have now taken over Goma versus the SADC forces with the SANDF included.
That's right. M23 started around about 2012, when some disgruntled officers within the Congolese army, who were, because the Congolese is mainly Hutus, their background. And there's a lot of Tutsis who are Rwandan supporting, because Rwanda is mainly Tutsi. And so the battles in the DRC have been going on from the 50s even. So, but there was a peace settlement where the DRC tried to incorporate, the former rebel groups, and that broke down in about 2012. And that's where M23 got its name, from March the 23rd, when they withdrew from the Congolese government forces as well. So they attacked DRC in the Eastern Congo, and the UN and South Africa, as part of the Force Intervention Brigade, halted them. And they beat them actually quite severely. And particularly, what put the coup d'etat into it actually was the Roy Falk attack helicopters from the South African Air Force, which was so instrumental as well in just forcing M23 to call it quits and melt away. And they melted away for about 10 years. And it was only in about 2022 now that, with significant support, training, and equipment from the Rwandans, that M23 has built up into a very competent army, you could call it. It is well trained and well equipped by Rwanda. And there are reports, UN reports, that the Rwandan army units are actually integrated into M23 as well. And they're no longer a rebel group. They are I was hesitant to call it a professional army because they're not, but they are very, very competent and well-equipped, advanced equipment, things that South Africa doesn't have in theatre. They've got drones, they've got surface-to-air missiles, they've got guided mortars and so on, which is very sophisticated. And that really has put South Africa and the UN and the SADC mission on a back foot. And that has now brought to where we are now, where in the last month, the ceasefire that Angola had negotiated broke down. And so it's been a month now that M23 has been on the offensive. They've now taken over Goma, and they've now threatened to move even south towards Kinshasa.
Dean, my final question speaks to what you've called a political decision, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has obviously sent these soldiers to the DRC as part of a SADC mission. What sort of conversations would he have had around intelligence, recommendations from the army itself, feedback, if at all, from the United Nations peacekeeping mission, that MONUSCO? There's obviously some intelligence around this SADC mission before making that decision? Because I'd imagine that it's not a case of we need troops in the DRC, come and support us, and gentlemen, there you go. I think there are some of those considerations. So what are the considerations versus what was overlooked and what makes it a political decision?
Indeed. South Africa has been active in the DRC, supporting the UN since 1999. So we've got extensive experience of the conditions there and what we are facing. Allied to that, as part of the UN mission, the UN does a lot of the logistics on behalf of the contributing troops. So when SADC decided to set up a mission in December 2023, when our troops first arrived there, we should have had good intelligence about what is happening and what is required. And bearing that in mind of the severe depletion of the capabilities of our defense force over the years, I understand that some of the senior defense force staff attempted to brief the government and the president as commander-in-chief of the current situation, of the difficulties. I believe Defense Intelligence separately also tried to brief the president as to what happened, or at least what to expect and the current conditions there. For one reason or another, either those briefings didn't get through or they were misunderstood, but the president still decided to send the troops.
So who would have briefed?
This is the repercussions now of that.
Sorry, Dean, who would have briefed the president then if these individuals whom you speak of sound like they're the most knowledgeable and best placed to give any advice on how to deal with the war situation?
That's right. Well, it would be the senior generals within the Defense Force, be it from the Army or from the Air Force. The Navy and the health services wouldn't have had as much of an input, but they would have written reports and suggestions that flows up through the Ministry of Defense towards the President. In the same, in parallel, Defense Intelligence and other intelligence agencies would have also submitted reports and provided briefings on this.
Dean, that's where we're going to leave that conversation. Dean Wingrin, as always, great to speak to you, giving us some analysis on that war in the DRC, with particular focus on the SANDF forces, where unfortunately 14 of those soldiers have perished in the last few days.